In a small town diner off Route 83, the kind where time moves slow and the coffee tastes like it's been brewing since yesterday, there worked a woman named Emma. Most folks didn't know her name. To them, she was just the waitress with the scar, the one who moved quietly between tables, kept her eyes low, and never asked for anything. Emma's days started before the sun. She unlocked the diner at 5, turned on the humming lights, wiped down the counters, and filled pots with stale coffee. She always wore a clean uniform, neat bun, and a name tag that said Emma, though no one ever used it. The regulars called her Scarface behind her back. Teenagers giggled at her and whispered stories: bar fight, bad boyfriend, motorcycle crash. No one asked, and Emma never offered an answer. The scar was hard to ignore. It cut down from her left eye to her jawline like a bolt of lightning frozen in her skin. But more striking, if you looked closely enough, was the faded tattoo just above her wrist. A small bird, wings curled protectively around a dagger. Most thought nothing of it, just another old mistake. But to someone who knew, it was something else entirely. Emma worked with the silence of someone who had learned not to be noticed. She never stumbled, never forgot an order, and moved with a rhythm that spoke more of discipline than of diner training. She seemed to know things. When a spill was about to happen, who needed extra sugar, or when to step away just before someone got rude. There was grace in her quietness, but also something heavy, something practiced. The other staff barely acknowledged her. Megan, a younger waitress with bright nails and a sharper tongue, always grabbed the best tables. Frank, the cook, muttered gruff greetings but never said her name. Even the manager, who only came around when he had to, treated her like part of the furniture. The customers weren't much better. Some left no tips, others left notes that stung more than the lack of money. Then, one gray Monday morning, everything changed. It started when a man walked in around 9:30. He looked to be in his mid-60s, gray beard, shoulders still square despite the years. He wore an old jacket with military patches so worn they were barely legible. Emma didn't look up at first. She was used to ignoring the comings and goings. But when he sat down at booth 7 and looked at her, really looked at her, something shifted in the room. She approached him with her usual quiet. "Coffee?" she asked. "Black?" he replied. Then, after a pause, he added, "Thank you." It was the first kind word she'd heard in days. The man didn't read the menu, didn't pull out his phone. He just watched, eyes steady, posture still, not in a creepy way, but like someone trained to watch. Emma recognized that kind of stillness. She had once known it herself. At 10:03, he spoke again. "You were in Mosul, weren't you?" Emma froze. The tray in her hand trembled for just a second. She didn't turn. "I remember that patch," he said calmly. "3rd Recon, Falcon Division." Emma turned slowly. "I don't know what you're talking about." But her hand, her left hand, moved slightly, revealing just the edge of the tattoo. The man nodded. Later, she stepped outside for a smoke. The rain had stopped, steam rising from the sidewalk. She didn't have to turn when he followed her out. "They said Falcon Division didn't make it past the Syrian border," he said softly. "Last report, all KIA." "That's the idea," she muttered. "What happened?" She didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, she pulled up her sleeve. The tattoo was clearer now in the morning light. He looked at it, then asked a single question. "How many?" 11, she whispered. "You were the one they called Nightbird, weren't you?" That name hadn't been spoken in over a decade. He nodded slowly. "They said you escaped with a broken leg, no gear, 60 miles through the mountains. Radio dead. One flare." "I don't talk about that," she said, and turned to go back inside. "You should," he called after her. "They're here today. The brass, the press, Air Force ceremony. Hero recognition. What does that have to do with me?" "Because they don't know the real story," he said. "But I do, and maybe it's time someone else did too." Emma didn't reply, but something had shifted in her chest, like a locked door cracking open. At 11:30, 3 men in crisp dress blues entered the diner. They took a booth at the front, scanning the room like it was a mission zone. Emma kept working as if nothing had changed, but her hands didn't shake now. Then it happened. The man at booth 7 stood. Every eye turned as he brought his hand up in a formal military salute, sharp, precise. Honoring, He was saluting her. The diner fell into silence. Even the grill in the back quieted. The other customers stared, not understanding, but feeling something had changed. Emma didn't return the salute. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. Later that afternoon, a file was slid across the counter. Inside redacted reports, mission logs, an unsigned letter of commendation, and a medal that had never been awarded because she was presumed dead. She accepted it without ceremony. That night, Emma left the diner in a black government SUV. By sunrise, she stood on a runway at a nearby base, watching a rescue chopper spin up for flight. She wouldn't pilot it, too many old injuries, but she'd sit co-pilot, advising the next generation. Emma, no nightbird, wasn't gone. She had simply been waiting to be remembered, and now she would help guide others home. Most folks at the diner didn't know Emma's story. They didn't care to. All they saw was the scar on her cheek and the way she kept to herself. That was enough for them to make up their own stories. Stories that suited their comfort, not the truth. The young waitress, Danielle, was the worst. Loud, pretty, always scrolling through her phone and taking selfies by the pie case. She called Emma Grimace when she thought no one was listening, and rolled her eyes every time Emma walked by. Danielle always took the best tables, the ones near the window with the big tips, leaving Emma with the ones near the kitchen that smelled of grease and loneliness. Then there was Joe, the cook, a man of few words and fewer smiles. He never said good morning, just grunted when Emma handed over a ticket. When he did speak, it was usually to complain. They want their eggs runny again. Tell Em we're not a 5-star joint. Emma never replied. She just slid the plate down the counter and kept moving. Even the manager, Carl, treated her like a fixture, reliable, invisible. He'd show up twice a week with his clipboard and cheap cologne, nod once at Emma without looking her in the eye, then disappear into the office to watch the security camera feed while sipping on the free coffee he never tipped for. And the customers, well, they were the cruelest of all. Some left pennies instead of tips. A few scribbled comments on the receipt like, "Smile more," or "Scars ruin breakfast." Others whispered loud enough for her to hear. That's what happens when you mess with the wrong guy. One man told his teenage son as Emma refilled their waters. End up alone and bitter like her. Emma never reacted. She never gave them that. But more than once, she'd excuse herself for a moment and go into the tiny staff bathroom. There, under the buzz of a flickering fluorescent light, she'd stare into the cracked mirror and press her palm against her chest like she was reminding herself to keep breathing. Despite the way she was treated, Emma never slipped. Not once. She moved with a precision that most would have mistaken for habit, but it wasn't just habit. It was discipline. Muscle memory. She noticed everything. Who liked extra butter? Who always needed a refill but never asked? Who had shaky hands or limps or nervous eyes? She remembered names no one told her. Birthdays. The way one customer always scratched his neck before ordering. Emma saw it all. Her steps were quiet, but not hesitant. Her uniform always spotless, even after 3 hours on the floor. She never dropped a dish, never forgot an order, never raised her voice. Her presence was like a shadow, necessary, always moving, never noticed until she was gone. To the people in that diner, Emma was just a broken woman lucky to have a job. But they couldn't see the way her body adjusted to weight without thinking, how her shoulders shifted like someone who once carried more than trays. They didn't recognize the way her eyes scanned every face, not just for friendliness, but for threat. They didn't hear the measured pause before she entered a room, or the way her hands stayed close to her sides like someone trained not to draw attention, but always ready to act if needed. There were flashes of something deeper, something few caught. Once, a retired cop sat at the counter and watched her for a while. He didn't say much, but when she turned to walk away, he nodded slowly and muttered, "Military. Special ops, maybe." His wife laughed and told him he was imagining things, but he wasn't. Because beneath the sleeve of Emma's left arm, hidden where only the brave or the foolish would dare look, was the mark, the faded tattoo of a bird wrapped around a dagger. An emblem not found in any online search or tattoo parlor wall. It was a signature, not of style but of service. One that only the few who'd made it through certain doors and over certain mountains would ever recognize. Yet in that diner, no one saw any of that. They saw the scar and made up stories to explain it, all of them wrong. Some days, Emma thought maybe it was easier that way. Let them believe she was just a woman who'd been through something ugly and never recovered. Let them mock her if it made their eggs taste better. Because the truth was something so sharp, so weighty, it would cut straight through their small, town breakfast comfort and never let go. She had buried that truth a long time ago, along with the names of those who didn't come home. She carried them in her silence, in the way she kept her back straight, in the way her hands never shook even when someone sneered at her face. But some truths don't stay buried forever, and scars, as cruel as they may seem, don't always mean shame. Sometimes they mean survival. It was a Monday morning, gray and wet, the kind that made folks stay in their cars a little longer just to avoid the cold slap of rain. The diner's windows were streaked with water, inside and out, and the radio hummed something slow and twangy about heartbreak and missed chances. Emma had already poured a dozen cups of coffee, wiped down the same counter twice, and tuned out 3 offhand remarks about her face. At 9:22, the bell above the door jingled again. She didn't look up right away. Most days, she didn't have to. She could tell who came in by the weight of the footsteps, the type of boots they wore, the pause in their breathing as they scanned the room. But this time, something was different. The boots were slow, heavy, deliberate. Not tired, trained, like each step was placed on purpose, like the man who wore them knew the weight of every sound. Emma finally looked up. There, just inside the doorway, stood a man in his 60s, clean, cut gray beard, eyes that had seen more than they said, and a cap held in one weathered hand. His jacket bore old military patches, real ones, not the kind you find in surplus stores. He stood still for a moment, scanning the room until his eyes landed on her. Emma froze. She didn't know his name, but she knew him, not personally, but in the way that 2 people from the same storm can recognize each other through fog. He nodded once, slow and sure, then made his way to booth 7, sat down straight-backed, hands folded, eyes steady. She moved toward him, her steps automatic, her tray balanced like always. But her heart was no longer steady. "Coffee?" she asked. "Black," he replied. Then, after a beat, "Thank you." The way he said it, "thank you," carried more weight than any tip she'd received in weeks. Emma brought him the cup, filled it without spilling a drop, and walked away. But her eyes kept drifting back to him. He didn't touch his phone, didn't fidget, just watched. Not in the creepy way she was used to, but with the kind of watchfulness you only learn in places where standing still can get you killed. Then, at 10:03, his voice broke the air again. "You were in Mosul, weren't you?" Emma stopped in her tracks. The tray in her hands tilted slightly, just enough for the coffee to slosh. She didn't turn around. "I remember the patch." The man continued calm and clear. "3rd Recon, Falcon Division." She turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "No idea what you're talking about," she said, flat as steel. He took a sip from his cup, unfazed. "Sure, coincidence." But his eyes lingered, not on her face but on her left wrist, on the tattoo, the one no one ever asked about, the one she'd covered for 10 years. She returned to the counter, hands steady on the outside, but trembling in the bones. That name, Falcon Division, hadn't been spoken around her in a decade. It wasn't supposed to be. Officially, Falcon Division didn't exist. Unofficially, it was a ghost unit wiped from every database after their last mission across the Syrian border went dark. All presumed KIA, all except one. The tattoo on her wrist, a bird with wings curved protectively around a blade, wasn't for show. It wasn't art, it was code, and this man, he knew it. By 10:11, Emma stepped outside for a break. The rain had stopped, steam lifted off the pavement. She lit a cigarette, though her fingers still trembled. Behind her, the door opened. "Didn't mean to spook you," the man said. She didn't turn, just inhaled. "Wasn't expecting to see a ghost here," he added. She let the silence stretch, then finally asked, "Who are you?" "Name's Thomas Raid," he replied. "Retired Recon. Was in the 2nd Extraction Team at Kandahar. Heard about Falcon Division. Heard they didn't make it out." She stared at the sidewalk. "They weren't supposed to." He stepped beside her. Not close, just near enough to share the silence. But one did, he said quietly. Ghostbird, that's what they called her, right? Emma turned slowly, her eyes sharp. You talk too much, she said. Reed chuckled, but it wasn't mocking. They said she escaped with no gear, no radio, broken leg, 60 clicks through the Zagros. Lit a flare to guide the evac team through a dust storm. Saved every one of them. She didn't deny it. Just pulled up her sleeve an inch, maybe two. Just enough to show the faded mark on her skin. Reed's breath caught. He didn't salute. Not yet. But something in his face shifted. Respect. Recognition. Why this place? He asked after a moment. Because it's quiet, she said. Because no one looks too closely. He nodded. Until now? Emma exhaled slowly and dropped the cigarette. They think I'm a waitress, she added. Let them. Reed stepped back toward the door. There's a ceremony today. Couple of flyovers. Press officers' medals. All for people who never saw what you saw. She didn't look at him. They don't need to. But maybe. He said gently, they need to see you. He opened the door and went back inside. Emma stood there for a while, the wind tugging at the edge of her sleeve. For 10 years, she had vanished into the rhythm of clinking plates and bottomless refills. But one man, one pair of trained eyes, had seen through it all. The ghost was no longer hidden, and the world was about to remember who she really was. By the time Emma walked back into the diner, the air inside felt different. Not warmer, not brighter, just heavier, like it had taken on the weight of something unspoken. She moved past the counter without looking at anyone, went straight to the sink and washed her hands. No one noticed the water running too long, or the way her shoulders stiffened for half a second before she dried them. Booth 7 was still occupied. Thomas Reid hadn't moved. His coffee sat untouched. His cap was folded on the table, and his hands were clasped, not in waiting but in reverence. His eyes followed Emma as she moved from table to table, just as before. Except now, his gaze held something different. Not suspicion, not curiosity, recognition. At 11:30, the door swung open again, letting in 3 men in crisp dress blues. Air Force. High rank by the look of them. They scanned the room like they were trained to assess threats, even while settling into a booth near the front window. They looked comically out of place. All neat lines and polished shoes in a place where the floor tiles were chipped and the coffee came in chipped mugs. Danielle whispered something snide behind the counter. Joe grunted and returned to his griddle. But Emma knew. She knew who they were and why they were here. They're here for the flyover, Reid said quietly from behind her. Big ceremony at the base. Recognition of heroism, valor, sacrifice. All the big words. Emma kept wiping a table that was already clean. They brought cameras, he added. A speech and medals. She didn't look at him. Then let them hand him out. They will, he said. But not to the one who earned them. Emma stopped wiping. Her hands stilled on the cloth. Her throat tightened. Just for a moment. That's not why I'm here, she whispered. Reed's voice stayed calm, low. Maybe not. But maybe they need to see why you're not up there. At that moment, the diner hushed. Not dramatically, not all at once. It was more like the sound had slowly drained from the room, like water from a leaky cup. The buzz of conversation dulled, forks stilled. Even the radio seemed to lower itself into silence. And then it happened. Reed stood. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't call attention. He simply rose, turned to face Emma, and lifted his right hand in a crisp, formal military salute. It was sharp, exact, flawless. A gesture from another life. A language spoken only by those who had worn the weight of duty across oceans and through fire. And in that diner, where Emma had scrubbed booths and poured coffee and been called Scarface and that waitress, for years, the gesture hit like thunder. Danielle froze mid-laugh. Joe looked up from the kitchen window, spatula in hand. Even the men in uniform at the front booth turned their heads, instinctively responding to the shape of something sacred. Emma didn't move. She didn't return the salute. Her face stayed still, unreadable. But her eyes shimmered like glass about to crack. Reed held the salute for a full 10 seconds, then slowly let his hand fall. I was at Kandahar, he said aloud. 2nd Extraction Team 2007. They told us Ghostbird didn't make it. That she went down with the last chopper. Emma's voice, when it came, was steady. I did. There was a pause, not a dramatic one, but one filled with something ancient: pain, honor, memory. But no one waited to see if I came back. And then she walked away, just like that. No explanation, no grand speech. She simply turned and returned to the counter like she always did, her apron catching at her side, her steps as quiet as ever. But the room stayed still. No one returned to their conversation. No one asked for coffee. Because something had happened. Something you didn't capture on a smartphone or write into a Yelp review. Raid sat down again, hands folded. The uniformed men looked at each other, confused, then solemn. Even Danielle, bold, loud Danielle, looked away. Emma stood behind the counter, one hand resting gently on the coffee pot, the other brushing the sleeve of her uniform where the tattoo lay hidden. Not to hide it, but to feel it. To remember it was still there, still hers. And just like that, the way people saw her had changed. The scar was no longer a curiosity, the silence no longer a flaw. The woman behind the apron was no longer invisible. She was known. Later that afternoon, the regulars would talk, but softly, like folks do in churches or cemeteries. And by morning, the whole town would know what they had witnessed, even if they didn't understand it. But for now, in that fragile silence, no one dared laugh. No one looked away, and no one would forget what it meant when a forgotten soldier was saluted in the middle of a diner, not by a general, not by a politician, but by someone who knew. Because some medals are never pinned to a chest, some honors come in the form of silence, and some heroes walk among us with nothing but a faded tattoo and a story no one dared ask until now. The diner had never felt quieter. Even the ceiling fan, with its usual wobbly hum, seemed to hesitate. The tension in the air wasn't uncomfortable. It was sacred, like a church moment stumbled into by accident. Emma returned to the counter, her movements steady, but her hands still bore the memory of that salute. Every eye in the place tracked her without tracking her, like they didn't want to stare, but couldn't not look. Then, the bell above the door chimed again. This time, it wasn't a regular or a drifter or another trucker looking for a hot plate. It was a man in his late 60s, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a pressed jacket with a single silver eagle on the lapel. A colonel. He stepped inside with a deliberate air, not flashy, not stiff, but purposeful. His eyes swept the room once, passed briefly over the uniforms near the window, and landed directly on Emma. Without a word, he walked toward her. Not with authority, with respect. Emma froze when she saw him, not out of fear, out of memory. He stopped just shy of the counter and removed his cover, a formal gesture even before the military one followed. Then, before all the waitresses and cooks and young punks on their phones could process what was happening, he raised his hand and offered Emma a salute. Not the kind you give a flag out of habit. This one was personal, held longer than usual, sharper than expected. It was for her. Again, silence blanketed the room. Then came something unexpected. The colonel set a folder down on the counter. It was thick, worn at the corners, secured by a plain elastic band. He slid it toward Emma. "This belongs to you," he said simply. Emma stared at it, didn't touch it. But her eyes, they read the seal. The Department of Defense. Someone, somewhere, had unburied what had been buried for a decade. "Where did you get this?" she asked quietly. The colonel didn't flinch. "Your name was redacted, your records sealed. But a file survived. Reed let us know. The timing was right." She looked down at the folder again, then slowly undid the band and opened it. Inside, aerial recon photographs, many of them burned around the edges. Mission logs with sections blacked out in thick permanent marker. After action reports filed in codes only a handful of people could understand. There was a typed commendation letter, no signature, never delivered. And at the very back, taped to a thin piece of cardboard, was a medal, a silver eagle with a cobalt ribbon. She blinked once, then shut the folder. "I never earned that," she said, her voice flat. The colonel didn't argue. "You earned more than that. We just couldn't give it to you while pretending you were gone." She folded the flap back over the file and set it gently to the side. "That's how it works," she muttered. The colonel laid a second, thinner file beside the first. This one bore a bold red stamp to classified. Emma didn't open it. She didn't have to. The weight of it settled in her bones like the rotor thrum of a helicopter she hadn't flown in years. The colonel stepped back. Then he did something no one expected. He turned and saluted again. This time, two strangers near the window, older men in jeans and windbreakers, rose slowly and followed suit. One of them had tears in his eyes and probably didn't even know why. Even Danielle, still behind the counter, dropped her phone. Joe the cook stepped out from the back, dish rag in hand. For once, his face wasn't bored or irritated. It was stunned. No one said a word. No one needed to. Emma stood there in the center of it all, not behind a counter, not hidden by uniform, not shielded by anonymity. She was exposed, but not vulnerable. The truth was out. She was no longer just a woman with a scar, or a waitress who knew how to carry 4 plates without spilling a drop. She was a survivor of a war that never made the front page, a ghost who had lived, a soldier who had returned. And everyone felt it. The air changed. It wasn't just respect, it was awe. It was the realization that someone had walked among them for years, carrying more than pain, carrying history. Emma didn't say much. She didn't need to. She placed her apron on the counter, slowly with care, and tucked the folder under her arm. Then she turned to Raid, who was still seated, watching her with the quiet patience of a man who'd spent a lifetime waiting for things to make sense. She nodded to him. "Thank you." He nodded back. It was time. The colonel opened the door for her. Outside, a black SUV idled at the curb, government plates, engine humming low. 2 plainclothes officers stood nearby, offering no greetings, just a silent acknowledgement that her ride had come. Before she stepped out, Emma turned one last time, scanning the room. It wasn't just a diner anymore. It was the place where a truth had been unburied, where eyes had finally seen. The bell above the door chimed one final time as she stepped into the sunlight, the folders pressed to her chest, and inside, no one moved. Not because she was gone, but because they finally knew, who she'd been all along. The ride to the air base was silent. Emma sat in the back of the black SUV, folders resting on her lap, one hand loosely curled around them like they might disappear if she let go. Outside, the Nebraska plains rolled by, quiet and unassuming, the same way she had tried to be for the past 10 years. No one asked her any questions. No one gave her a speech. They just drove. By the time they reached the outer gates, the early afternoon sun had begun its slow descent, painting the sky in long streaks of amber and violet. A young lieutenant waited at the entrance, clipboard in hand. When he caught a glimpse of the tattoo on Emma's wrist as she stepped out, his posture snapped straighter, not out of fear, but reverence. He didn't say a word, just nodded and opened the gate. She had walked through more secure compounds than this. She had passed under camouflage nets in war zones, entered bunkers carved into mountains, crouched in cockpits as bullets sliced the air around her. But this walk back into uniformed silence felt heavier. A hangar door stood open across the tarmac. Inside, a helicopter waited. Not just any helicopter, an H-60 Pave Hawk, the same type she'd flown into valleys that didn't exist on maps. This one was newer, better equipped, but its silhouette stirred something deep in her bones. Muscle memory. Echoes of rotors slicing dusk, of weightless moments between life and loss. Colonel Grant met her halfway across the flight line. He didn't offer his hand. Instead, he walked beside her, matching her pace. "Would like you to advise a new team," he said. "Tactics, extraction under pressure. No press, no cameras. Just people who still need what you know." Emma didn't answer right away. She kept her eyes on the chopper. "You won't be flying," he added gently. "But they need your eyes, your judgment, your instinct." She gave a quiet nod. That part never went away. Across the tarmac, a ceremony had just ended. She caught sight of 3 flag-draped caskets being loaded into a waiting transport, young men, maybe women. She didn't know. But she felt it. The sharp, invisible tug of memory. The kind that stitched her back to the night she had crawled through enemy territory with a broken radio, a flare, and a promise she refused to break. She turned toward the chopper. The rotor blades had begun to spin, slowly, deliberately, like they were waiting for her to say yes. A young crew chief waved her forward, motioning to the side door. Emma climbed in without hesitation. It wasn't ceremony, it was return. Inside, the seats were new. The the systems updated. But the hum, that deep, vibrating hum, was exactly as she remembered. It rattled through her ribs, settled into her spine like a ghost come home. She strapped him beside the pilot's seat, the co-pilot's spot, not to take control, but to guide, to teach, to protect the young hands now entrusted with the lives of others. As the bird lifted off the ground, Emma glanced out the window. Below, the base receded. Beyond it, the town, the diner. She wondered what they were saying now. Maybe Danielle was still behind the counter, trying to act like nothing had happened. Maybe Joe was scrubbing his grill in silence. Maybe the old men at the front booth were still sitting, coffee cold, eyes wide. But they would remember. They would remember the woman who served them pancakes without smiling, the one they called names and mocked behind her back. They would remember the day she didn't flinch, but someone saluted her. They would remember that she walked out with folders bearing seals they didn't recognize, escorted by men they'd never seen before. And above all, they would remember that they'd shared breakfast with a ghost who turned out to be real. The pavehawk banked gently, leveling off. Emma felt the pull of altitude, the whisper of old instincts nudging her mind awake. She closed her eyes, not to escape, but to feel. This wasn't hiding. This wasn't exile. This was purpose. She reached up and touched the scar on her cheek. Once it had been a wound. Then it became a mask. Now it was a mark, a map, a reminder. She looked down at her left wrist. The tattoo was still there, still faders. Not a burden now, but a key. One that unlocked doors she never thought she'd enter again. Ahead, the horizon burned orange, streaked with twilight. Emma didn't speak. She didn't have to. Every thrum of the rotor, every inch of lift, every glint of sunlight on the control panel spoke for her. She wasn't the waitress anymore. She was the one who survived. And now, finally, she was leading others home. In every diner, in every small town, there's someone like Emma. Someone who walks softly, who keeps their head down, who doesn't ask for praise or attention. Someone others overlook, or worse, judge by what little they think they know. A scar, a silence, a look in the eyes. But here's the truth life keeps trying to teach us: never mistake quiet for weakness. Never confuse invisibility with irrelevance. The strongest people you'll ever meet are often the ones who never raise their voice, because they've already survived storms most of us can't imagine. Emma wasn't just a waitress. She was a rescuer, a fighter. She bore the weight of missions the world never read about, made choices most wouldn't be brave enough to face, and carried the memory of those who didn't come home, all while pouring coffee with a steady hand and a bowed head. And yet she was mocked, overlooked, forgotten, until one man remembered, and with one simple salute, the world around her finally saw the truth. So the next time you pass someone by, the quiet janitor, the scarred cashier, the tired nurse, the old man sitting alone, pause. Look again. You may be in the presence of a hero. Now it's your turn. Have you ever met someone like Emma in real life? Someone strong, humble, and quietly extraordinary. We'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. Your voice might just inspire someone else today. And if stories like this matter to you, if you believe that the quiet heroes deserve to be seen, to be remembered, and to be honored, subscribe to our channel. We share real stories that stir the soul. Because not all heroes wear uniforms, and not all battles leave visible wounds. Let's make sure their echoes never fade.